They're droning aquarium right now. Yeah, they're about to pinch me inside of Puka.
They just droned at 90.
Yeah, one's Aquabout coming in, Habana. I'm gonna ping.
That's Yang. Okay, playtime. You got
This one's gonna plant probably.
Planting now.
Go.
Mission
To the
critical.
left.
Activated.
Hard left.
Easy.
Yeah,
Well played. Play.
Located the
Okay, good
diffuser.
shit. Well
Destroy
played.
it.
Done, man. Well played.
This is Siege. Of all the shooters currently on the market, I believe Rainbow Six stands above the rest. Siege is a journey. It stops where we decide it does, but the path is never ending. And although some of us may be further on that path than others, we've all taken our first step into a world of destruction, control, and teamwork. A year ago, I told you of all my problems with this game, and today I'd like to explain why I kept coming back despite them. I'd also like to explain how Siege teaches players its countless lessons, and how we apply that knowledge to better ourselves as teammates. This is an exploration of how Rainbow Six Siege captured 50 million players, and why it will capture 50 million more. Siege is the perfect first page. It's that amazing pilot episode. It gives you a taste of its complexity disguised as simplicity, because at first glance, Siege is just a game about one team getting to an objective and another team trying to stop them. Siege works because that basic observation is correct. These observations are how a deep understanding of the game is developed, because all of Siege's advanced concepts start with simple ideas. A new player sees that Siege has an enormous roster of characters to choose from, and with the more they play, they understand how they're divided by the game's role system and the importance of those roles. Attackers have entry fraggers that are the first to infiltrate the building, and support players who aid them with intel and prime objectives for breaching. Defenders have anchors that hold sight, and roamers who play around the map to delay the attacker's push into objective. As that player continues growing, they'll find the third role on both teams called Flex, a role existing between the ones already being played that is required for a specific strategy. And once that player has forgotten a time when all these icons were mysteries, they'll have realized that characters are just characters. They may be predisposed to fulfill one role on a team, but you can do anything you want with them, and sometimes that predisposition is exactly what's required for them to excel in unconventional positions. Operators, of course, are only a part of Siege's steep learning curve. It's when you set them loose on the game's maps that you have the game we know and love. Again, we start with simple ideas. You either have to breach an objective, or you have to stop the people trying to. Both are reliant on your understanding of the maps. In most games, map knowledge would only expand with your experience, but in Siege, your map knowledge also grows with your creativity in a way that other games don't enable players to. Siege is the only competitive multiplayer shooter that allows you to reshape your environment through its destruction physics. Walls and floors can be destroyed in a variety of ways, gaining you lines of sight or entry into objectives. What dynamic destruction helps Siege do is factor the player into the process of game design. The developers design the operators and map layouts, and the players use those tools to craft the most effective tactics. Bandit tricking, which is the now standard tactic of timing bandits' battery placement in order to destroy exothermic charges or pellets, was not a feature originally intended by the developers. It was a method created by players because they were given the freedom to. Bandit tricking could only exist in a game where one player could destroy a wall and another could deny it. What Siege offers up to the player is not just freedom. It's freedom and the consequences of freedom. You're able to play whoever you want, however you want. You can pick any site on the map, reinforce it however you'd like to, and attack it however you'd like. But at the end of the day, the law of Siege is that the enemy team will hold you accountable. And this is how we learn. Siege could be described as the game of 1,000 deaths, but that implies you only learn in the game through failure when success can often teach you similar lessons. Siege is often cited as one of the more challenging multiplayer shooters due to its lack of respawning, but it's that harsh and immediate consequence of playing your cards incorrectly that makes you want to continue playing the game because you either know you're better than that or you aspire to be. Siege's gameplay loop is driven by player versus player interaction. Every single engagement you have with another player is an exchange of information. One player is teaching something, the other is learning. All of the skills we would associate with great players like game sense, ability to read opponents, and patience are the result of years of clashing against the autonomy of other individuals. What differentiates Siege from other multiplayer games with the same approach to teaching are its dynamic elements that create a web of potential outcomes for every encounter. Siege's sound propagation alone is already game-changing, but the ability to impact the game with that intel the sound gives you is what makes Siege as different as it is. And in the process of doing that, by affecting another player's experience with this information, you two are exchanging the information that creates Siege's learning curve. But this isn't all Siege asks of its players. It's not a game that just expects you to not make the same mistakes you did yesterday, today. Siege is a game that wants you to extract what you've learned from playing on attack or defense and apply it to the enemy's mentality when you're playing the opposite side. In this clip here of defense on Consulate, I'm in a 1 versus 3, which is certainly not an ideal situation. However, I've known since the start of the round that the enemy team is doing an admin take, and that their plan is to plant diffuser in meeting. I know this because if I were coordinating the same attack, I wouldn't tell my team to spawn gas station on the opposite side of the map. The fact that I can't detect anyone here in this area on Pulse's heartbeat sensor at this point in the round tells me that they have no plans on attacking CEO. Since I've had this information from the beginning, I know my win condition is not killing X amount of people. It's simply denying the plant in meeting. I also know that once I deny the plant, the person that I already spotted watching Yellow Stairs rotation from Skylight is going to have to peel back to cover a second plant attempt. After I successfully deny the plant, I'm free to rotate back up Yellow Stairs after the person that I spotted earlier abandons the angle. I down the person going for a diffuser, and we win the round. The enemy team failed because they probably assumed that I would stay in piano where they droned me and that the plant was free because I wouldn't read into the fact that no one was ever going to plant CEO. They were also very mispositioned. If they were playing it smarter, they'd have had somebody on Spiral as they were going to plant because I could only deny from lobby and I would have been a pretty easy kill. This may have worked for them before, but their intel on me was bad. The lesson they learned here is to clear the person below with C4 instead of assuming that they won't try to deny because they're too dumb to read into your basic strat. The reason I was able to teach that lesson to those players is because I already learned it a long time ago when I was on the receiving end. Because you play both sides in Siege, you fully understand what is required for the enemy team to win and how to stop them from doing so because you've been in their shoes. Again, this could be said for many multiplayer games, but what none of them have is the synergy between Siege's gadgets and destruction that create an ever-changing nuance in the way the game is played. Even on maps nearly as old as the base game itself that are losing their competitive flexibility, there are still new angles and new strategies being found thanks to the game's physics and map layouts. With that said, the consistent introduction of new content in Siege cannot be understated in this conversation. One of the biggest reasons for Siege's success post-release has been how well its DLC has been integrated into the game and its growing list of changes that have also been made since then. Siege is not the same game it was at launch, and thank God for that, but it's also not even the same game it was a year ago. Where other shooters may introduce new characters and new maps, they never quite create the same excitement Siege does when it announces the same things because they don't have an equal impact on the game. We just went over how malleable Siege is just at its core, and what the operator and map updates do for the game is re-engage the player every 3 months by continually extending the learning curve. New operators create new ways to play and new ways to play against, ensuring that old maps are constantly refreshed with new playstyles. And if a map is standing on its last leg, it gets reworked and you start learning how to play it all over again. There's always something to learn in Siege, whether it be because of the complexity of the base game or the changes and additions they make every season. Siege's appeal is that it puts the onus on the player to create their own experience. The sink or swim paradigm that Siege adopts is ultimately what makes it such a fun and engaging title. Growth in Siege is tangible to an extent not seen in any of its contemporaries, as they simply do not ask as much of their players because the systems to accommodate their extensive creativity don't exist. I have over 700 hours in this game, and I have only scratched the surface of what there is to learn. The skill difference between me and players with thousands of hours is oceanic in proportion. But that's great because it means I still have a lot of learning to do and skills to apply, which I know is going to be as enjoyable as when I first started learning the game. I also know it'll be easier now than it was back then because Ubisoft is far better at managing the game now than they were 2 years ago. A lot could be said about Ubi's approach to Siege. This game started off vastly different than what it ended up being both post-release and in its own development cycle. Since then, the game has become incredibly more competitive, which Ubi has finally adapted well to. The final point I'd like to make about Siege, and why I believe it is the best current first-person shooter, is about Ubisoft. Over a year ago, I extensively detailed my issues with Siege that I thought were detrimental to the player experience, and in a year's time, almost none of those issues exist anymore. I said that it didn't make sense that attackers couldn't choose spawns and that defenders had no idea what site they were defending in casual. Now attackers can and defenders know. I said that secure area and hostage had no place in ranked, and now they're gone. I said night mode should be taken out of the game, and it was. I was hardly the only person complaining about these things, but that's the point. Our voices were heard and continue to be in a way that I do not see in any other multiplayer game I play. In sharp contrast, Black Ops 4, another game I did a detailed critique of, has only gotten worse since I talked about it. It's in a horrible state where Treyarch seems to have given up on the game. The updates are all paywalled atrocities that have broken the balance of the game even worse than it already was. For reference, this is how bad it already was. Every day, people complain about how broken and unbalanced the game is, and changes come sparsely, if at all. Now compare this with how Ubisoft treats Siege. There are certainly a number of grievances I have with certain operators and even certain decisions made about how the game operates, but that number goes down every single update. Because Ubisoft, contrary to popular belief, listens. It's that simple. They give a damn about the well-being of the game, and the relationship between the player and the developer is one of compromise, the way it should be. I'd love it if they removed every shield from the game, but that's not realistic or fair, so I'm very happy with all the changes to the shields, and more importantly, the implementation of the pick and ban system into general play, because now I don't have to play against them. I hated New Hereford, but I know it must have been hard for them to remove it from ranked after all the work they put into remaking it. It's not an easy thing to work on something for months only to have it rejected so boldly. And this isn't the first time this has happened. Tower spent 3 months in ranked and it was gone by the next season because it was terrible. The ability to admit that and stop subjecting your player base to it is something that should be admired, because honesty is the only way you'll get your players to trust you. When something is broken in this game, I trust that it will get fixed. When there is something unbalanced in this game, I trust that it will get nerfed. When there is something that stands to harm the longevity of this game, I trust that it will get changed. The bottom line is this. Rainbow Six Siege is the most unique shooter I've ever played. It is the only game I want to be good at, And I've realized that this is because Siege is a reflection. It's a reflection of your dedication, of your personality, of what makes you, you. Siege's real genius is not just its mechanics, it's how well the use of those mechanics depict the person using them. That's why most Siege players have the bond they do with the game, even if they don't realize it. Siege is a testament to whatever you want it to be, which is possible because of the mechanics that allow us to express ourselves. Siege can be fun, Siege can be competitive, Siege can be both at the same time, all depending on how you approach the game. Siege is the game you decide it is, and that's why it's the best first-person shooter. Because Siege best represents us. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you'd like to support more content like this, you can go over to patreon.com/dx and become a patron. Thank you to Anpeck, Darren Kimball, Eternash, Ethos, Final Fash, Gidmodo, Hyserian Blade, HGov HF888, JCC Gamer, Kid Frost, Lolwell and Teapot, Mechai Lawrence, Nico Randall, Psycho Render, Rennie Paid, and Vera for helping make this video possible, and thank you for supporting the vision.